So if you've got all the programs installed, we're now ready to get started with the lab. And the first step is to go to the course repository and create a fork of the overall repository. This will create a copy that you're free to update. And so if we first press this button to fork it, we can see that all the files seem to be here. We still have the link to the course webpage and everything that was in the original repository. Next, we're going to open up GitHub Desktop. GitHub Desktop is the tool that we're going to use to interact with the GitHub repositories. If we look here, we should have our clone version of the repository right there. So we're going to clone that. We're going to clone it. Let's clone it directly to the desktop. All right. So that's now copying all the files that were in the public repository to the local desktop. And we're going to make a small change to that, commit the change locally, and then re-upload that change as a pull request. So the first step is to create an additional branch. Again, branches are used as a way of separating changes. And so we're going to call this my new branch. And next we can just right click on here and say open in Finder, and it shows us all of the files. But there's two things that you need to update in here. So first make a copy of the template. And then we can paste that right there. We can change it to, do it for your last name, your first name, next, I want to open this with the text editor. You should change the information to be consistent with your desired job, program, usernames, and so forth. Also, make sure that this location of the photo is consistent with what you put in here, as you can see these other. When we go back to our repository, we can now see that Git has located these new additional changes, so we can see everything's in green because they're new files. We can commit this to the my new branch, so we're going to commit this repository just with a comment. Next, we can publish this to our fork repository. And then finally do a pull request in which we request that our change located in this branch is pulled back into the original repository. So we're going to call this new student for lab 1, my first pull request. There you go. That's all there is to creating your first pull request. Now, in order to create essentially a clone of the original repository, it's possible to do the work for this class on the forked repository, but you have to then make sure that you're always in sync, and that just gets somewhat complex. So the next step we're going to do is create a clone of the original repository on our machine, and we're going to use that just by pressing this button, Clone in Desktop. Where are we going to put this? Put this on our desktop as well, and we'll call it VM for virtual machine. So you can see now on the left-hand side, you've got two repositories on your machine. One is the fork repository. You can see that fork right here. This is the original repository. And here you can see the variety of different changes that I've made along the way for the fork repository. The next thing we're going to do is to launch the virtual machine, and that's really quite easy. So we right-click on our newly cloned repository. Actually, a couple things here. As you continue to work on this and start a lab, it's always a good idea to press sync. Sync will make sure that you have the latest version of the files. You can see each of these is representative of a pull request, where a pull request was made per the first lab. And so here we can right-click on the repository, do Open in Terminal. And as it indicates in the course web page, there's two commands that you need to run for the lab here to go about the process of building your virtual machine. The first one will install a Vagrant plugin that's necessary in the configuration process. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to go to Vagrant. I think I already have it installed. But it's still going to go through the process of installing it. And then finally, I'm going to press Vagrant up, or type Vagrant up, and this is going to launch the process of downloading, configuring, and building our virtual machine. This is going to take a few minutes, in which I will pause the recording. All right, so now we've finished the configuration of the machine. Here you can see there, I think I have debugging turned on, so a lot of the configuration processes pop up in the terminal. But everything is working right. You should be able to see that the virtual machine is running. You can always check that manually through VirtualBox. So if you open up virtual machine here, you can see we have one that is essentially running. These do take up a lot of space, so here if you look, there's an additional one that I've previously configured. I'll actually go ahead and delete this. If you want to delete virtual machine, it's relatively straightforward. Just hit remove and delete all files. You can always reconfigure it by pressing Vagrant up. Do note that you will lose anything that you've changed right on the virtual machine itself. So now that we have the virtual machine up and running, what does that mean? How will we use it? Well, we've got here at the end of the lab a link to your local machine for RStudio. As you can see, this is calling URL on the local host, which is your machine. It does require sign-in, and this is authenticating versus our Linux server. So the username and password is going to both be Vagrant. And this launches our server console. Here we've got the R console right here. We've got the environment for development, and we can access the files that are on the server right here. We'll be going over this in future sessions. You can also see, similarly with IPython, we launched that, and we'll be able to run IPython right from here, uploading in, and there aren't any IPython notebooks currently, but we'll be using essentially Jupyter is the next version of the IPython notebook that provides a little bit more flexibility in managing IPython notebooks, and was the default install for the Spark virtual machine created by the online MOOC. So that is it for our summary of the lab. If you do want to access the virtual machine, let's do one more thing. You can just do Vagrant SSH, and that logs you directly into the Ubuntu machine. Here you can see the information, see the files. These are the files that are listed in the IPython notebook. And that's it. So hopefully in this you've got a taste of a little bit of how Git works, how to build your local virtual machine, and why we're going about this process, because of really the similarity between the needs of a development environment and the needs of a data science environment. That's it.